I would like to talk about a tale of three men. A tale of three men. All of these men are doing something very similar, but all of them are doing something also very different. And the way it's being interpreted and the way it's being conveyed in regards to just visually looking at it, the perusal of it all, it's tonally different and somewhat strange. Trump, Lavrov, and Putin. Trump, Lavrov, and Putin. It came out by the Financial Times. And again, you didn't take the Financial Times, or you didn't need the Financial Times to say this. It was kind of obvious that the United States was directing an air campaign against Russian energy sites. Now, one day after the next, you would see Russian energy sites continuously get hit over and over and over. Now, this is also in conjunction with Donald Trump trying to get India to stop using Russian oil, trying to get Europe to stop using Russian oil, something they were never going to do. And of course, wanting to pressure China and other countries also. This obviously failed on the diplomatic sense. In Europe, India, and China, everybody told Trump to go pound sand. So the other aspect to that was the kinetic part, which was effectively directing Ukraine to hit energy sites. All right, that was something that he was literally doing. Now, as I pointed out before, the obvious reason that Donald Trump is doing this is because he has no cards. He has no leverage. And because he has no leverage, he's stuck in a position of weakness in any kind of negotiation or any conversation he has with Putin. Ultimately, Putin continues on the battlefield, continues to make their gains. Ukraine continues the manpower shortages and weapon shortages and everything else, meaning they are in a massive cauldron in various parts of Ukraine, where Donbass will most likely fall within a year, maybe even several months, especially if there's a collapse in the military sense. It is obvious. It's just blatantly obvious. Anything that is being legit that you read on this, that is going into the military circles, meaning what's happening on the ground, makes it very clear that in main areas of Donbass, Ukraine is getting routed. So, if that is your situation on the ground militarily, then what do? You have no leverage. So in Trump's mind, I'm going to go after the oil. I'm going to go after their energy. If I can damage their capability of doing energy, then maybe I can get them to come to the table where I have some level of, let's say, weight in the negotiations, where I have some level of cards that I can play to put more lipstick on this particular pig, to deal from a position of strength, because that's what the U.S. wants to do, because the U.S. is a hegemon and hubris compels behavior. That hasn't worked. And when Russia has finally decided to step up their campaign on the energy of Ukraine, 50, 60% of the ability for Ukraine to do oil and gas up in smoke, eliminated. You get Zelensky screaming bloody murder, saying there needs to be some kind of ceasefire in the air, and is begging Daddy Trump to effectively help him effectuate that. Now, when everybody was saying, oh my God, Russia's getting hit in the gas thing, they thought it was great. When Russia asserts itself in regards to the energy and the infrastructure of Ukraine, of course, everyone screams. Because at the end of the day, Russia has the whip hand in that process. It doesn't work. It didn't work. There's that. But what's interesting, what's important in that is that the Trump administration, who's pretending to be a negotiator and is claiming that this is not his war, it's Biden's war, is directing a military campaign against Russia. That is the point that matters. All right, so that hasn't necessarily worked. So Donald Trump brings out this notion of Tomahawk missiles. Now, the Financial Times is reporting that the U.S. only has about 50 Tomahawk missiles that it can give Ukraine. This is obviously not enough to change the context on the battlefield. And there's this question of, as Putin pointed out, this will be the United States attacking Russia with these missiles. Now, the first time around, when this was brought up under the Biden administration, Putin's response was somewhat hyperbolic, and it scared Joe Biden enough, but Joe Biden sat there and refused to give those missiles. This time around, Putin's response is far more muted. It's far more muted. And Russia continues its deferential nature towards the United States. This is despite the fact that the United States is running an oil war against Russia. There's that. And this is also despite the fact that the United States is talking about firing directly missiles at Russia. Financial Times reports that the U.S. has already picked out its targets, and that the missiles can be sent to Ukraine rather quickly. There is no talk about training the Ukrainians in using these missiles. What they're talking about doing is sending mercenaries or contractors. And again, mercenaries, contractors, U.S. soldiers. How do you know that these aren't U.S. soldiers pretending to be contractors, just like there are mercenaries in Ukraine that are most likely soldiers pretending to be mercenaries? In either case, it doesn't really matter. For all intents and purposes, this is the United States directing, picking targets, and firing at those targets at Russia directly. You've broken a taboo. Now the U.S. is in Ukraine because it would take, again, those contractors coming from the U.S. to be able to fire those missiles at Russia. That's a big deal. It's also secondary a big deal and somewhat of a problem because, as I pointed out before, the first time this came up, Putin made the point of saying this will be a massive escalation and this will be the United States attacking Russia because it takes the U.S. hands in order to do it. Now, I suspect that two things were taking place when Donald Trump brought this up. A, it was a bluff and a threat in one part. And B, it was a trial balloon. The trial balloon, or the bluff and the threat part, is obvious. It is a man searching for relevance and searching for some level of capability to create some level of strength in some kind of talk, negotiation, etc. From the standpoint of the trial balloon, the entire point of the trial balloon part was, how does Russia respond to us bringing this up? What do they do? What do they say? Are they being hyperbolic about it? Are they saying they're going to hit targets in Europe? What are they going to do? And of course, with this conversation being talked about for about 2 weeks, what you got was Putin continuing to be deferential. Now, yes, they said it would change the relationship in regards to the US and Russia, and this would be an escalation. But again, deferential and pragmatic. So I strongly suspect that the choice has already been made to give these missiles to Ukraine. And they probably have already picked out the targets. And whether it's 20 missiles or whether it's 50 missiles, those missiles will create a context by which the United States is directly in Ukraine, and the United States is directly creating a norm and firing missiles at Russia. There's that. The other part to that also is this is crossing a red line that was established by Russia and was established by Putin, effectively saying, look, this is you attacking us. Just be aware, this is you attacking us. Well, they're crossing that line because from their point of view, Putin has been deferential the entire way through. Putin has been a consummate diplomat all the way through. Putin has effectively been pragmatic all the way through. And so if you're in the US and you're looking at this, you're saying to yourself, what is Russia going to do? They're probably going to attack Ukraine more, but they're already attacking Ukraine. So what does that matter? And they're probably going to be very angry, put out threats and everything else. But that is most likely going to be the extent of Russia's action. Putin will remain pragmatic. And because Putin will remain pragmatic, we're okay in doing this. I understand that some people have this belief, and a lot of people have this belief, that this pragmatism is a good thing. And on some level, the pragmatism is. But pragmatism, like anything else, really depends upon who you're dealing with. I had two aunts in my life. Well, I had my mom and my aunt. My mom will give the shirt off her back, nicest person in the world, has a tendency to get walked on because of that. And so when you're dealing with her, you have to deal with her in that context of creating a balance. No, I am not going to allow you to do this because this is not in your best interest. Meaning you have to be aware of who you're dealing with. With my other aunt, you have to fight for everything. You have to know who you're dealing with. Now, if you are dealing with somebody who's pragmatic and dealing with somebody who's an honest actor, then your pragmatism will be honored and accepted as pragmatism. You're not dealing with that. You're dealing with people who are sociopaths, who overthrew a government in order to launch, or at the very least, create a huge military on your border, knowing full well that it was going to incite and start a war. You're dealing with people that have effectively killed, 100, 200,000 Russians, not to mention the 1.5 million Ukrainians that are dead right now. I'm saying you're dealing with monsters. You're dealing with people that attacked Venezuela, that is literally murdering Venezuelan fishermen, that kill how many in Iraq, how many in Afghanistan, how many in Syria. You're dealing with people who are working right now with a dictator. And yes, not a dictator, a head chopper. And yes, I know that Putin was working with the head chopper also when he's in Moscow now, but I'm pointing out that it was the West's head chopper that they've installed in Syria and have turned a blind eye as that head chopper that they effectively back and installed is out there murdering ethnic minorities as we speak. You're dealing with monsters, is the point that I'm trying to make. The pragmatism has only been seen as weakness. And in this very specific case with the Tomahawk missiles, that again, most likely will end up in Ukraine, will most likely be fired at Russia with US hands, US targeting, being in charge of it. And you still get a deferential Russia. The other part and problem to this is that deference gets across something. It gets across a power dynamic and a differential in power dynamic. What I mean by that is I understand that there are other actors around the globe that Russia wants to get across that, look, we are open to negotiations. We are being the ones that are pragmatic. Those are being the monsters. Those are being the ones that are escalating the conflict and everything else. Okay, fair enough. That's true. But what does it matter in the real sense of the word? And if indeed what this ends up being is the US firing missiles into Russia, blowing past a red line, what does it tell Europe? And what does it tell the United States? It says Putin is bluffing. We can put troops in Ukraine. Putin is bluffing. He was bluffing about this particular red line. This was a big deal, right? This is a taboo being broken. This is the United States and Europe firing missiles directly at Russia with their own hands in doing so. And Putin remained pragmatic. I'm saying there is something that you lose in the process of being pragmatic if the people who you're dealing with that are monsters don't ultimately believe you're serious. And while it is true that you will push into a point where Russia will respond, I'm saying that maybe you didn't need to get to the point of getting to that extreme response if indeed you were more serious and more aggressive in the interim. I am not asking Russia to start a third world war. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to point out that if your enemies and opponents don't believe you're serious, then you may end up in that third world war as a direct result of them stepping over a boundary that you told them was a boundary, but they didn't believe was a boundary because up to that point, you effectively allowed them to blow your red lines. So this is what the US is doing. This is what the Trump administration is doing. Zelensky is apparently going to the White House on Friday. That conversation is going to take place. I don't believe for a moment that conversation or that decision has not been made. And the Financial Times reporting on it is probably correct. Now, you can make the argument that that's just a threat. Maybe. But what is the downside for the United States in this case? If indeed Russia continues to fire, or the US fires missiles into Russia, what has Russia's response been? Well, these are old missiles. These are old missiles. And we know how to deal with attack items. And maybe one or two get through. I mean, we know how to deal with Tomahawks. So maybe a few get through, but all things being equal, meaning the response that was there when Biden pointed this out has now been moved to, well, these are 80-year-old missiles. These are from the 80s. It's okay. We can deal with that. We're not going to change anything. We're just going to keep the pace. I'm pointing out that is moved. That's a line that is moved. And that will be interpreted as they're bluffing and they're not being serious. Mark my words. I could be wrong. I always point out I could be wrong. Don't mistake incoherent for true. Simultaneously, and right beside it, Lavrov gave a press conference. As the US talks about killing Russians, listen to what Lavrov is saying. Russia believes the Alaska process is not over. Russia believes the Alaska process is not over. United States President Donald Trump's statement about potential supplies of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine have nothing to do with the discussions of the Ukrainian settlement, which took place during the Russian-U.S. summit in Alaska. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said, quote, its statements on possible Tomahawk missiles supplied is not a response to the concept which was discussed in Alaska. None of his statements regarding Tomahawks have anything to do with what was conceptually discussed in Alaska, or I would rather say conceptually and practically, unquote, Lavrov said in an interview with Kommersant newspaper. Let's keep going. Russian President Vladimir Putin brought to Alaska, quote, a response to the proposals delivered by U.S. Special Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff to Moscow a couple of weeks before, unquote. He said the Russian president, quote, took some time for considerations at that end and said in Alaska that he's ready to agree with the concept with Witkoff brought because it reflects the understanding of the root causes in the first place and is aimed at eliminating them, unquote. In fact, he explained how the concept could be realized after its adoption. So just to be clear, this is Lavrov saying, look, I know they're talking about firing Tomahawks at us, but the Alaska process hasn't been extinguished. And what we discussed in Alaska has nothing to do with this talk of Tomahawk missiles. These things are separate concerns. Witkoff brought a message to us about dealing with the root causes of the war. We agreed with Witkoff's proposal, and we also gave some kind of point of view in regards to how we maneuver this, how we get to where we need to get to. Now, let's keep going. I want to go with this because it is super interesting that these two things are taking place side by side. The U.S. is talking about imparting cost on Russia, where Lavrov is saying the Alaska summit is still at work. The U.S. is attacking oil fields, literally, real physical objects being destroyed, with the U.S. pointing out how to do it. Lavrov is saying the Alaska summit process is still in operation. Let's keep going. So Lavrov continues. He says, following the talks in Alaska, Trump went on to consult, as he said, allies in Washington, then in turn, trying to convince U.S. President, following the talks in Alaska, Trump went on to, quote, to consult, as he said, with his allies in Washington, unquote. Then in turn, quote, are trying to convince, unquote, U.S. President that it is not Vladimir Zelensky and Europe who are making fools of them, but rather Russian President Vladimir Putin does not want peace. Effectively, Donald Trump went to Europe. This is put very weirdly. Donald Trump went to Europe. Europeans came to Washington. The Europeans are effectively saying, look, Putin is making a fool out of you. He doesn't want peace. And that's what they're trying to convince Trump of. Quote, yes, Trump is under pressure, Lavrov said. And now Trump administration understands the need to look into the root cause and is trying to do it, unquote. This is what Lavrov is saying. Lavrov continues, quote, we're still waiting for specific response to the results of the talks in Alaska. We're loyal to them, unquote, Lavrov said. Moscow will keep an eye on how things are going in Washington and how the United States president and his team responds to ultimatums of Kiev and certain Western leaders regarding the conflict settlement, demanding that they, Trump and his team, change their inner feelings and intuitive approach to Ukraine and openly take a position promoted by most of the rabid Russophobic Europeans. Quote, we presume that mutual understanding was conceptually reached there in Alaska. The parties also discussed how this understanding could be transformed into practical actions on the ground. We clearly outline how we see it. President Trump said that he needs to consult with his allies. The consultation process is apparently continuing, unquote. This is Lavrov's statement. This is Lavrov's statement. I don't believe for a moment, at least God, I hope not, that Lavrov believes even 10% of what he said in that statement. Meaning in the same way that Donald Trump is putting on this show of bluster and power and strength while being a weak man who can't entirely make a decision, and not just entirely can't make a decision, has no cards in this process, which is why I'm going to say he's weak in this process. Lavrov is effectively trying to be the consummate diplomat, saying, hey, the Alaska process is still going. I understand that they've been hitting out oil fields. I understand that they're getting Tomahawks, that they're going to attack us. But for all intents and purposes, this is because Trump is being pressured by the Europeans. And because Trump is being pressured by the Europeans, we still await what Trump effectively gave to us. And so we are going to let this process play out. I don't believe for a moment Lavrov entirely believes that. What Lavrov may believe is that, yeah, Trump and the Europeans are together. Trump is doing everything in his power to get some level of leverage. This seems to just be obvious at this point. I would imagine Russia has to accept that. But that they're open to diplomacy, that they continue to be open to diplomacy, even as the Trump administration tries to get leverage. And maybe the Russians believe that none of that stuff is going to ultimately work. There's that. What is Putin doing? On Putin's birthday, we talked about this slightly. Again, we have time. What is Putin doing? And the reason why I say there's no way Lavrov believes what he's saying in that, because regardless of what Lavrov is saying, and regardless of the deference that Putin is effectively showing, they're signaling something else. Meaning Lavrov is saying in one sense, yes, we're being diplomatic. But in another sense, what they're saying is we are going to proceed militarily. We're making no changes, and not just making no changes. We have released the dogs of war, that much more so in Ukraine. This is Putin on his birthday. In fact, this is called, right, take a look at this. This is Peter Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg. That is amazing, right? Putin came here on his birthday with his generals. He came here on his birthday with his generals. These are some of the pictures of that trip. All right. Why is he in St. Petersburg on his birthday? He also visited the tomb of the other czars that are there. There's a church there with tombs of Catherine the Great, Peter the Great, emperors and czars. Catherine II apparently was the one that was able to get Odessa and establish Odessa. Many of the other ones, and the way this is being interpreted, of Putin visiting czars and the emperors at the church, you have some dumb people who are saying this is a death cult. Those people fundamentally miss the subtlety of what is taking place. Putin is there because Putin apparently has given his generals a greater license to proceed and expand whatever their military objectives and whatever their goals were prior to it. Meaning, whereas Trump is putting a lot of bluster, even though Trump has no cards, and whereas Lavrov is being a complete diplomat, even though Lavrov knows that most of what he's saying is just effectively not true. Meaning Lavrov may take that line of, we are continuing with the Alaska format, but Putin going to the tomb of the other emperors and czars with his generals is sending a message to the world that I am releasing the dogs of war. That this belief that we're going to be able to get a deal out of this is obviously subsiding. And maybe the 10% of what Lavrov believes is that when it becomes brimmingly clear that all of this has failed and we've expanded further into Ukraine, we are open to negotiations once again, even though we may have added 2 or 3 more additional areas that are now under the auspices of the Russian Federation. So no, I don't believe for a moment that Lavrov believes what he's saying. I believe that what Putin and the signal that Putin has given is the honesty of the Russian position, despite the deference and everything else that is taking place with Putin. The reason why I take issue with the deference thing has to do with this idea of like, have you ever seen a child yell at an adult? It's weird, right? It looks weird. It breaks the continuity of this idea of you're a child and the adult is ideally you're better because you're a child. How you talk to people on some level gets across the power relation between the two. There's a reason that China is engaging with the United States in the way that it's engaging with the US, where it ups the ante every time the US ups the ante, because it's getting across we're equals. You're not better than me. We are equals. This idea that you were a hegemon that we need to pay attention to, and that's over with. We are peers. And I'm saying that the deference gives an impression that we are not dealing with peers. If you look at what is taking place when Donald Trump is in those meetings, and you have one person after the next kissing Trump's ass, hey, you smell so great today, sir. Your toupee is just fantastic today. Your teeth are a special shade of yellow. Your breath is, smell like ass, which is much better than what it usually smells, sir. When they're giving him those compliments, do you think that they really believe that stuff? Do you think Donald Trump really believes that stuff? Or do you think, from Trump's point of view, whether it's true or not is irrelevant to the point that you feel the need to say it, which shows a differential in power between us? Meaning the very fact that you're complimenting me demonstrates power dynamic in exponential terms. I'm saying the deferential thing also comes across in a particular way. And if they are destroying your oil industry, or trying to anyway, if they're firing missiles in your country, at your country, and you remain deferential, how does that look? And does it encourage, let's say, nefarious actors to go further? Does it egg him on in this belief that he is not being serious? Meaning, it is very clear that Putin is making the point of saying, if we need to take it all, we need to take it all. And he is signaling where the Russian military is going. Not to mention, you can see it on the battlefield, but obviously Odessa is on the list of places that Russia is going to have firmly in their pocket at the end of this military conflict. Putin, understated, is signaling what he is doing. He's like Babe Ruth pointing out his shot. Lavrov is being the complete diplomat as Putin is giving that signal. That signal will probably be clear to the Russian population, even though it will fall dead on many of the Americans and many of the other people who know nothing about what is taking place in regards to Russian history, or that even Putin was at that grave with his generals. These three men are each functioning in this, even though the appearance of it is different. All of them are putting on a certain facade. Lavrov totally knows that the Alaska process is busted up until the point where Ukraine starts losing that much more territory, or the military collapses, in which case then he can maybe renew the Alaska summit, where it becomes clear that Ukraine is fundamentally lost. That may not take place. Putin, however, is at the grave, even though he's being deferential in one sense. He's getting across a clear signal that if we need to take it all, we will take it all. Period. You have our surrender document. Either sign it or you don't. Trump, on the other hand, not being deferential, by the same token, has very few cards to play in this process. All three of these men are effectively doing things in the way that they're projecting things to the outside world. And I'm saying each has this false persona that they're putting on, but the false persona looks a particular way in the way that each of them are portraying that. I hope that makes sense. It's a tale of I want to say a tale of three men, but it's not really that. To me, it's interesting how there's the face and there's reality. Trump is weak in this. Truly, remorselessly, remarkably weak. He has no cards to play in regards to the military situation that may not, or that won't necessarily escalate this to something like a third world war. Meaning, if you want to put the US military and get NATO directly involved, okay, well, now we may be talking, but now we're talking about a nuclear war. Short of that, Ukraine is getting routed. Every bit more so every day. By the same token, he's projecting as if, well, I may fire missiles. I'm going to choose where the missiles are going to go. I'm going to choose where I'm going to hit Russia and this and that. Russia's lost 1 million men. I can't believe Putin is continuing to do this, as if he's in control of something that he is not in control in. The persona is strength. The reality is weakness. Lavrov, complete diplomat. Persona, I'm infinitely diplomatic. I am a foreign minister. My job is to be a foreign minister. The Alaska summit process is still going on. Yeah, I understand they're firing missiles at us and everything else, but those missiles that are being fired that may be killing Russians has nothing to do with the Alaska summit and the process that was initiated during that Alaska summit. Does he believe it? Probably not. That is the face he's projecting to the world. In Putin's sense, well, maybe Trump should have won the Nobel Peace Prize. And, you know, if this war wouldn't have happened if Donald Trump was in office, and blah, 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 blah. While simultaneously, I'm going to the graves with my generals and we are preparing for war. Full stop. All of these people are putting on a certain persona. And yet there's an underlying reality to all of it. Putin's persona is passivity in some sense, while projecting strength and reality. Meaning, regardless of him being pragmatic, the reality of it is Russia is directing events on the ground. Russia is obviously a massive military power at this point. And Putin is clearly winning the war. Ukraine is being routed. Lavrov is being completely diplomatic, but probably believes very little of what he's actually saying. At least God knows, I hope he believes or doesn't believe what he's saying. And Trump, full of bluster, full of hubris, full of ego, a man searching for leverage. And if you're searching for it, you obviously don't have it. It is very interesting what is taking place. It is also very dangerous. When you get Trump coming out saying stuff like this, that Russia has lost 1.5 million men, one of two things is true. Either he believes it, which will embolden him to dumb actions, or he's just lying, which would indicate that, again, he's lying for reasons, those reasons being to continue with this process. Buckle up. Buckle up. So there's that.